3 days after the birthday party, Verra still expected Valheim to come back. She couldn't understand why he'd stayed away for this long, but she told herself it would blow over. He was just upset. He always came back, right? He had before, after all. They'd go through rough patches, but they always worked it out. This time was different, though. The first day went by with nothing. No call, no message. By the second day, she started to feel a knot in her stomach, but she brushed it off. It was just a misunderstanding. She texted him again, sent a few more messages, hoping for a reply. Still nothing. By the third day, panic began to creep in. She tried calling again. Nothing. Just voicemail after voicemail. Then on the fourth day she received an email. Not a text, not a phone call. An email. Just a few cold, emotionless sentences that hit her harder than she ever expected. Verra, I've moved out. I've been planning this for weeks. The relationship has become irreparably toxic, and I can't continue like this. I've documented everything, emotional manipulation, public humiliation and gaslighting. I've spoken to a lawyer. I'll be filing for divorce. My father will collect my things on Thursday. Please don't be there when he comes. It was short, straight to the point. No room for negotiation. Verra read it over and over, convinced there had to be some mistake, some misunderstanding. But the more she read it, the more she realized it was all too real. Her world had shifted, and in a way that she hadn't expected at all. She immediately called Melissa, hoping for some kind of comfort, some reassurance. Instead, what she got was the last thing she could have imagined. I had no idea it would come to this, Melissa said, hesitating. I thought you were just joking, Verra. But I think he really meant it this time. He said it was too much. He said you pushed him too far. Verra's heart sank. She hadn't been prepared for that response. What do you mean he really meant it? She asked, her voice shaking. You were supposed to be my friend. Why didn't you tell me? Melissa's silence was deafening. I didn't know how to, Verra. I tried to warn you, she said softly. I never thought it would get to this point. But now he's gone. And it's not just him. It's everything. Verra didn't know what to say. She hung up the phone, the words hanging in the air. She couldn't breathe. The silence in the house seemed to swallow her whole. She walked around the empty space they had shared. Everything in its place, but nothing felt the same. The living room, once full of laughter, was now quiet. The kitchen where they used to cook together felt cold. She checked the places where he used to leave his keys, his shoes, his jacket. Every corner of their life together now seemed so empty. By the time she made her way to the bedroom, she stood there for a moment, staring at the closet. His clothes were gone. His side of the bed untouched. It felt like a ghost of their life together remained, and it all seemed so unreal. Her mind kept returning to that night, the party, the cake, the joke. It was supposed to be funny, but now the joke felt like a cruel twist of fate. How had she not seen the consequences? How had she not realized how deeply her actions had hurt him? The tears came slowly at first, then faster, until they were uncontrollable. She cried for the love they had, for the person she had lost, for herself, for the parts of her that had made her do what she did. But more than that, she cried because she knew she couldn't fix it. There was no going back. Valheim had made up his mind, and she had pushed him too far. He wasn't coming back, and she was going to have to live with the consequences of her own actions. For the first time, Verra saw herself clearly, without the layers of defense she'd built over the years. She had spent so much time trying to make Valheim feel jealous, to get him to react, to keep him on edge. And all along, she had been tearing away at the trust between them, piece by piece. Now there was nothing left. Her phone buzzed and she looked down. Another message, but it wasn't from Valheim. It was from her lawyer, confirming her appointment. She stared at it, then dropped the phone onto the bed. It was a reminder of what was coming. The end of her marriage. She was alone now, and there was no one left to blame. Tomorrow would be the day she had to face the truth. And it would be a hard one, a hard truth to swallow. But it was time. Time to stop hiding, to stop pretending, and to start figuring out who she was without the relationship that had once defined her. But that was tomorrow. For tonight, she was still trapped in the consequences of her actions. Verra sat at the kitchen table, staring at the divorce papers. They had arrived a few days ago, slipped under her door in an envelope, as if the entire weight of her marriage could be summed up in a few neatly typed sentences. The papers were signed, finalized. No turning back now. Her lawyer had explained the process clearly, no surprises. But the more she stared at the paper in front of her, the more it felt like an alien language, words that didn't belong to her life. Divorce, it sounded so final, so cold. It made her feel small, like her entire existence had been reduced to one singular defining moment. For weeks now, she'd been wrestling with the aftermath. Every time she looked in the mirror, she saw something different. Someone different. The face staring back at her wasn't just Verra, the woman who made jokes at her husband's expense, who pushed boundaries to get a reaction. It was the face of someone who had lost more than just a marriage. It was someone who had lost a sense of self, someone who couldn't even recognize the person she had become. Her friends, those who had stayed, tried to offer their support. But it was clear that their words were distant, measured. Some, like Melissa, had distanced themselves. She had chosen a side, and Verra felt the space between them grow wider with every passing day. People who once laughed with her now avoided eye contact, their conversations polite but filled with unspoken judgments. And the social isolation? It was suffocating. Even the ones who didn't judge her outright began to whisper, to question. "What happened?" they asked. "Didn't you two used to be so happy?" They were right, in a way. Before all the jokes, before the endless tests of loyalty, there had been a time when everything had felt easy. When Valheim had been everything to her, and she had been everything to him. But those days seemed like a distant dream now. As if they had lived someone else's life, someone else's love story. As for the legal part of it, the divorce proceedings themselves, Verra had never imagined this part of her life. She'd spent her time convincing herself that she could laugh off the tension in their marriage, thinking she could simply joke her way through the tough spots. But no matter how much she joked, no matter how many times she twisted the truth, the cracks in the foundation were still there, growing larger with each passing day. She had never wanted to admit it, but this divorce was the final consequence of the emotional manipulation, the gaslighting, and the cruelty disguised as humor. Verra didn't know who she was now without Valheim. There were days when she felt like a stranger in her own skin, someone who didn't fit into the life she had built. She remembered their wedding day. Valheim standing beside her with a nervous smile, promising to be her rock. That man had been dependable, trustworthy, and patient with her. He had tolerated the jokes, the needling, the subtle digs, all in the name of keeping the peace. But peace had a cost. And now, as she looked at the empty spaces in their home, the places where his things used to be, she realized the price was higher than she had ever imagined. The truth settled in like a heavy weight in her chest. She had failed him, and by extension she had failed herself. She had pushed him to the edge, and when he finally broke free, there was nothing left of their marriage but the empty echo of words spoken in anger and frustration. And the worst part? She had never truly understood the damage she was doing until it was too late. As the divorce process moved forward, Verra was left to face the reflection in the mirror once again. She wasn't just looking at the end of a marriage. She was looking at the aftermath of her actions, the way she had used humor as a shield, and how it had eventually shattered everything around her. She thought about the people who had witnessed it all, those who had seen the subtle shift in her behavior in her relationship. They had tried to warn her, sometimes gently, sometimes with more concern, but Verra hadn't listened. She had told herself they didn't understand, that they were overreacting. But now, with everything falling apart, she knew they were right. They had seen something she had refused to admit to herself. She signed the papers, her hand trembling. It was the end, but in a way, it was also the beginning of something she couldn't yet name. The road ahead would be long, and the consequences of her actions would stay with her for a while. But in that moment, Verra finally realized that healing couldn't begin until she acknowledged the truth. It wouldn't be easy. It would be painful. But for the first time, she was ready to face the consequences of what she had done, and start the long journey toward reclaiming herself. And maybe, just maybe, one day she would look in the mirror and see someone worthy of love again. But for now, it was enough that she could face the truth. And that, for Verra, was the first step toward healing. As Verra sat alone in her now quiet home, the silence felt louder than anything she'd ever known. She kept replaying moments in her mind. Those little things, those small signs that she had brushed off or laughed away in the past. She wondered, was I always like this? Was it always part of her nature to joke at the expense of the people she loved, to push boundaries just to see how far she could go before someone would break? Had she always been the one to test and prod, to see how far she could take things before reality finally slapped her in the face? She thought back to the first year of her relationship with Valheim. It had been easy, almost effortless. They'd laughed together, talked for hours, shared dreams and hopes like any couple in love. She could still remember their first date, the way Valheim had looked at her when she'd told a joke about her failed cooking skills. He'd laughed so hard, the kind of laugh that made her feel like she had just won his heart. It felt like they were in sync from the start. But now she wondered if that was the first red flag. Maybe it had started when she'd pushed him to laugh at something that was more biting than funny, and he had, unwillingly. The more she thought about it, the more the signs became clear. It wasn't just one thing. It was the accumulation of small moments, the subtle shifts, the little jabs disguised as jokes that eventually grew sharper, more frequent and more damaging. When they moved in together, she started making comments in front of their friends, things that she'd once brushed off as just playful teasing. Valheim's probably working late with Jessica again, she'd said with a smirk, knowing the quiet unease it caused him. He'd never reacted then. He would just smile weakly and she'd move on, thinking nothing of it. She had been so caught up in the idea that keeping him on his toes was necessary for the relationship to stay interesting. It wasn't about trust or affection. It was about power. How much could she make him squirm before he got too comfortable? Then came the time she had picked up his phone while he was in the shower, just a quick glance at his messages, because what if there was something he wasn't telling her? When he returned and found her holding his phone, he had asked what she was doing. Instead of being open, Verra had snapped at him. "Why are you spying on me?" And he, naturally, had looked confused and hurt. But she laughed it off, telling herself it was just a harmless moment. A joke, right? The first time he asked her to stop with the jokes, she had laughed it off too. It was his problem, not hers. He was being too sensitive. She even teased him for being boring. Why should she stop? After all, everyone else thought it was funny. But now, with the distance between them, with everything that had happened, she couldn't help but wonder. Had she always been like this? Had she always taken so much pleasure in pushing his boundaries, knowing how easily he would back down? And what had it really cost him? Verra closed her eyes, trying to pinpoint the exact moment things had started to fall apart. Was it the constant needling? The jokes? The way she tried to make him feel insecure just to feel in control? Or was it the subtle neglect, the emotional withdrawal that came as she continued testing him with each joke, each comment, each time he silently accepted her words? She thought back to the night when she had made a joke about Valheim's other wife in front of his co-workers. The uncomfortable silence that had followed. Valheim's smile had faded, but she hadn't noticed. It had felt so good to make him squirm, to show her friends that she had him under her thumb, even if just for a moment. Verra was beginning to see the truth now, the truth she had been blind to for so long. She had allowed herself to believe that keeping things exciting, keeping him on edge, was a sign of love. She had mistaken emotional manipulation for passion, believing that pushing his buttons meant that their relationship was still full of fire. But it had only burned the trust between them. The laughter, once shared so freely, had become the sound of her own isolation. Was she always like this? The realization hit her hard. The little moments, the jokes that were supposed to be fun, the teases that had turned into real emotional wounds, they were all there from the beginning. And it was only now, with the consequences in full view, that she could finally see them for what they were. She thought about Valheim's email, the finality in his words. She thought about the quiet way he had walked out, leaving her with nothing but the remnants of their life together. Verra finally understood that the red flags had been there all along. But she had been too focused on her own need to feel powerful, to be the one who held the control, to notice how much she had been pushing him away. Now, all she had was the aftermath, the reflection of her actions staring back at her. And the only thing left to do was start picking up the pieces of her own heart, as well as the shattered remnants of a marriage she had broken without even realizing it. The story wasn't over yet. But for the first time, Verra was ready to face the truth of what she had done. Verra stood in the kitchen, the refrigerator door open in front of her, staring at the now old and moldy cake. The once beautiful chocolate cake with orange zest, carefully picked from the best bakery in town, was a silent witness to everything that had gone wrong. She hadn't been able to throw it out. Not yet. It felt like she was throwing away a part of the life she once had. Her last attempt at something meaningful, something she thought would heal the cracks in her marriage. The cake was still there, untouched for weeks, a sad reminder of what could have been. A symbol of the hope she had put into a moment, a joke that had gone too far. Every time she opened the fridge, it was there, sitting in its box, still looking the same as it had when she'd ordered it with so much excitement and anticipation. She had imagined Valheim would love the party, that he would laugh, joke along, and they would forget the tension, that the night would somehow be a turning point. But now, with the cake growing stale and forgotten, she realized it had never been about the cake. It had been about what she wanted: control, validation, the need to prove something to herself. She had wanted to see Valheim's reaction, to test how far she could push him before he snapped, not realizing she had already pushed him too far. The cake, now molded and forgotten, seemed to represent her marriage, something that had started with sweetness but had been left to spoil. She hadn't seen the damage she was causing until it was too late, until it was already over. She could no longer ignore the fact that she had played a part in its decay. Verra took a deep breath and finally opened the box, staring at the cake for a moment. There was no reason to keep it anymore. There was no reason to hold on to something that symbolized her mistakes, her inability to see the love that had been in front of her all along. It wasn't just the cake she needed to let go of. It was the part of herself that had allowed her to believe that this kind of humor, this kind of behavior was acceptable in love. Her heart ached as she scraped the cake into the trash. It felt like a small act of letting go, a symbolic step toward healing. But there was still a heaviness in her chest, an emptiness that came from the realization that things would never be the same. The man she had loved, the man who had stood by her through everything, was gone. And she couldn't undo what had been done. But as the cake disappeared, something else began to shift. Verra found herself thinking less about the hurt she had caused and more about what she could learn from it. She had been so caught up in trying to control everything, trying to make everything fit into her narrative, that she had lost sight of what really mattered: respect, trust, and communication. It wasn't about proving a point. It was about building a connection, not tearing it down. She realized now that the only way to move forward was to face the truth, not just about Valheim but about herself. She had let her insecurities define her actions, and those actions had led her to this point. The cake, the jokes, the games, none of it had brought her closer to the person she had wanted to be, nor had it brought her closer to Valheim. It was time to stop blaming him, stop pointing fingers at the things he hadn't done right. The blame was hers to carry. And with that realization came something else, something unexpected. A sense of growth. For the first time, Verra saw her mistakes clearly, without the haze of defensiveness or guilt. She wasn't perfect, but she was willing to learn. And that was the first step toward changing, not just for herself but for anyone who came into her life next. As the last crumbs of the cake were scraped away, Verra felt a quiet sense of release. It wasn't just about the cake. It was about letting go of the past, embracing what was left, and being ready to face the future with a new perspective. The road ahead would still be difficult. There would still be moments of doubt, moments of regret. But for the first time in a long while, Verra knew she was on the right path. She didn't have to be perfect. She didn't have to have all the answers. She just had to be honest with herself and with anyone else who might walk into her life. And as she cleaned the last of the cake crumbs from the counter, she realized something. The real healing had begun. Not with the removal of the cake, but with the realization that sometimes, letting go of the things that hold us back is the only way forward. And that was the first step to rediscovering who she truly was.